what do you think is the intersection between personal growth and communal development?
It's such a great question. One of the pieces that we adopted from the 12-step structure in the whole human framework is the sponsor-sponsee relationship. So when people do the work in our community, they do the work and then they share the work with another. And the other who they share the work with, they don't have a relationship with. But our traumas and our wounds, we've buried them deep, if you want to use language to describe it, right? Like in the dark. And so we bring them out and we expose them in the light to the consciousness and spirit of not only ourselves, but to another. And that helps facilitate the transformation of that energy from dissonance to resonance. At a larger scale, you look at what 12-step or the community that we've built or the community that you've built, right? And why people are experiencing a greater level of awakening. And it's because it's fellowship is critical. So it's not just doing the work with another and rather than yourself. It's now being in a community of people who are disciplined in a practice of being their unwounded self, of being their higher self. And then to your point, I believe that intelligence's purpose for all of this, or spirit or God or Jesus, Allah, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it, but the purpose for all of this is for us to awaken through this process of first individual, and then where more than one comes, there's even more energy, right? Scripture tells us that. Napoleon Hill told us about the mastermind concept. Then you move into fellowship, and then you move into this collective connecting with the rest of humanity. And along that linear process, one would describe it as, oh, I discovered my purpose. And then we would look to see what that purpose is, because they've accumulated enough resonant energy. And that purpose would be giving or serving in some way. And I'm not saying you have to be a coach. You could be a fashion designer. You could be a restaurant owner. You could be, but you're now truly driven by, the genetic predisposition of your destiny and your dharma to go do this thing. And it's more clear now because it's no longer being choked off or suffocated by these misunderstandings and these hand-me-downs that we got. And now you're plugged into the whole world. And even beyond that, I think personal growth is the linchpin of the evolution of the human species. And what's happening is those who are really committed to doing their own work are doing it, is they're learning how to downregulate their nervous systems and to actually rewire their brains and to move from the habit of sympathetic fight or flight that most of us live in most of the time, into parasympathetic. And that's where New Age folks talk about your vibe or your vibration, right? So your vibration or your resonance changes. You're now living connected to everyone and connected to spirit. And if you look at the Eastern teachings, now you start to unlock all kinds of yogic capabilities. And we see these yogic capabilities in nature. It's how the birds know how to fly together, and the fish know how to swim together, and the beehive and the ants know how to operate together. So that's the potential of humanity. And, maybe going back historically, people talk about the Lemurians or the Atlanteans, like maybe they had that kind of connectivity. But the bottom line is, and it's such a simple conversation in a sense, our traumas create dissonance. That dissonance is like a radio frequency disruption that is separating all of us. And as we work to transform these traumas, these limiting beliefs, these personal stories, these misunderstandings, and these wounds into resonance, the frequency becomes clean, and we all start to become more powerful together. And that is now the macro conversation, I think, of how we become so powerful that we have the stability within ourselves and the courage and the connectivity to walk away from the current system. That's a larger, right, like geopolitical conversation, which we can dive into. But that's why I wake up most days and I'm like, shit, I'm so excited to be alive right now. It's like Avengers Endgame, but it's real.
Well, I think there's a couple threads that I wanted to pull on in there, because I've studied Carl Jung just endlessly, and I really think that he's got some insightful work. But one of the things that he talked about extensively was this notion of the collective unconscious, right? That we're all sort of interwoven, that a part of our unconscious mind holds archetypes and symbols and myths and threads that bind us all together as a collective. And when you look from a anthropological stance, every culture, pretty much, maybe not every single one literally, but the majority of cultures, in their myths, in their religion, in their stories, they have some telling of an interconnectedness between all human beings, right? And so that notion that you're talking about between, how bees work together or the birds fly together and make their way over thousands of miles, it's so interesting to me that we somewhere along the line have disconnected from that knowing, right? From that wisdom of like, there is an interconnectedness between us, and we oftentimes don't see it. And I think what's fascinating is, I've talked about this on a bunch of shows, that my sort of theory or my belief is that we've created that collective, a manifestation of the collective unconscious in the internet, in social media, and suddenly we're interacting with it in a way that is sort of material, versus a way that is within ourselves, right? It's externalized versus internalized. And I think what you're talking about, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it almost sounds like a reconnection to a deeper kind of internal wisdom of connectivity with other people and attachment, relationships, connection, plugging back into other human beings and not sort of seeing them as, separate nodes out there in the world that you have nothing to do with. So is that roughly accurate in terms of part of what you're saying? What would you add into that?
Well, a couple of things. Again, if we simplify it into all energy, when we come together, we're energized. I'm plugging into the energy that is you, and I'm actually plugging into the whole like decision diamond, all the branches that go out from you. And so, when we're together and we're engaged and we're truly connected, I've got access to all kinds of information. My body's downloading the resources that you've tapped into that it might need in order for my own personal healing or wealth accumulation. You could just look at it in an extreme way of like, if I just stay at home by myself, there's not a lot of information available to me. There is information available to me. I mean, you and I have both been in practices, like ideas and inspiration come to us, but there's so much value to plugging in and connecting with other people. It's interesting to see how humans got this way, because I think in some sense, there are a lot of different evolutionary theories. I think like the stoned ape theory is really interesting, that like, for tens of thousands of years, we were walking around eating magic mushrooms. And so our brains grew and we developed into human beings. Maybe. I'm
it's a fun one, if you've ever done mushrooms and you like them.
A lot of magic mushrooms right now, and they seem to be evolving spiritually. You got to do the work too, but right, these third-party tools and technologies can be helpful. But then as our brains evolved, all of a sudden we started having thoughts. Really the ego evolved, and so then there was separation. And so this is almost like how can we be this species that has the intellectual and emotional capacity and free will that we have, while now through that process of individuation, learn how to connect back in. And community is very, very important. And I think that's why what's happening right now, both with media propaganda and corporate capture of the media and of governments and of non-governmental organizations and of all kinds of organizations, like the kind that are meant to, you have institutions that are meant to be regulated that are now essentially governing their own regulatory bodies. And so there's this massive distortion taking place. And in that distortion, it feels as though there's an intentional separation. I mean, certainly we had that in the pandemic. But when I go out, I'm in Puerto Rico now, but I just spoke at the Raymond James Chairman Council. It's the 100 top performers within one of the biggest, wealth advisory organizations in the world. Everybody had a lot of different opinions, but everybody was really kind to each other. But you wouldn't see that or believe that if you were watching the news. And so there is this architected attitude of separation that's taking place too. And so we need to move through all of that, because wellness comes through connection, business growth comes through connection, obviously healthy relationships come through connection. Having you in Vienna here, for example, starts to model for Carol and I new aspects of our relationship that we can adopt. Like we can download that programming through connection and relationship. So like I'm 100% hell yeah with you in terms of the importance of it. And then I think the questions to ask are, okay, so what is interfering with that? What is preventing us both from within myself and also external in terms of the structure of the world, the structure of these systems that we are influenced by?